Welcome back. Today we take a look at two of the past tenses that we use in the narrative tenses, and these are the past perfect tense and the past perfect continuous tense. We'll take a look at the formula and examples of how to use them and when to use them. Let's begin. We'll take a look at the form of both the tenses. We begin with the past perfect simple tense. To form the past perfect simple tense, we use the verb had plus the past participle form of your main verb. Now this is also called the third form of a verb. For example, the verb to take. Take would be the infinitive form or the first form. Took would be the past form or what we call the second form, and taken would be the past participle form or the third form. Now with regular verbs, this means we add a D or an ED or an IED to the main verb. However, with irregular verbs, we'll need to change the spelling. For example, the verb to fly. The past participle form of the verb fly is flown. The verb to eat. The past participle form of the verb to eat is eaten. In both cases, we don't add a D or ED or IED. We need to change the spelling. Now with the past perfect simple tense, whether the subject is singular or plural, we still need to use had as the first verb. For example, I had taken the train. He had taken the train. We had taken the train. It's the same verb for all. Let's look at the form of the past perfect continuous tense. And this is the formula. We use had been plus the present participle form of your main verb. And the present participle form of verbs is the verb plus the ing. Again, whether or not the subject is singular, we use had been for all of them. For example, I had been taking the train. He had been taking the train. We had been taking the train. Now let's look at the negative forms of both the tenses. With the past perfect simple tense, we use had not or its contracted form hadn't plus the past participle form of your main verb. For example, I hadn't seen him before now, or I had not seen him before now. He hadn't watched the show before you told him about it. We hadn't cleaned the room when our parents came home. She hadn't reminded me, so I forgot to pack a jacket. And now the negative form for the past perfect continuous tense. We use had not been or its contracted form hadn't been plus the present participle of your main verb. For example, I hadn't been working there for very long. He hadn't been breathing for more than 30 minutes when the paramedics showed up. We hadn't been smoking in the last 15 years. The prisoners hadn't been fighting for more than 20 minutes before the guards came in. So these are the negative forms of the past perfect simple and the past perfect continuous tenses. Let's move on to the question forms. With the past perfect simple tense, we use had or hadn't plus the subject plus the past participle form of the main verb again. Let's look at some examples. Hadn't you seen him before now? Had he watched the movie before you told him about it? Hadn't we cleaned the room before our parents came home? Had she reminded me to pack a jacket before we started on this trip? Now let's look at the question form for the past perfect continuous tense. Again, we can either use had not or hadn't plus the subject plus been plus the present participle form of the main verb. We can also begin with had, just like with the past perfect simple. For example, had I been working there very long? Now, if I were to use this in the negative question form, this question would be, hadn't I been working there very long? Note that we still use been plus the present participle form of the verb, whether we use the positive or the negative question form. Next example. Hadn't he been breathing for more than 30 minutes before the paramedics showed up? Had we been smoking in the last 15 years? Hadn't the prisoners been fighting for more than 20 minutes before the guards came in? Now let's take a look at the notes for the past perfect simple tense. When do we use the past perfect simple tense? First, when we want to describe a completed past action before another action in the past, this is when we will use the past perfect simple tense. Let's take a look at some examples. The street was very dark. All the lights had gone out. In this example, the lights went out first, and therefore the street was very dark. The first action was the lights going out. The consequence, or the second action, was that the street was dark. Second example, I tried to call her, but she had left for the day. Again, in this example, there are two actions. She had left for the day is the first action. This is followed by me trying to call her. So the first action that is completed in the past, we use the past perfect simple tense. The action that follows the second action, we use the past simple tense. In these two examples, was and tried. Now, note that we often use before or after when we write sentences with the past perfect simple tense. For example, I paid for the room after I had completed the booking. Again, in this example, we have two actions. The first one is the completion of the booking. The second is paying for the room. Again, we see that with the first past action, we use the past perfect simple tense, had completed. The second action uses the past simple tense, in this case, paid. And we use after to show which action happened second after the first one. Let's look at the next example. She had tried out the laptop before she bought it. In this example, trying out the laptop was the first action, therefore we use the past perfect simple had tried. The second action, bought, uses the past simple tense. And in this sentence, we use before. Again, this shows us which action happened first and which one second. Now we often use already or yet with the past perfect simple tense. For example, the scientist had not yet found the cure, so the public was worried. Note the position of yet comes after our verb had and before the main verb found. The next example, we had already watched that movie, so we decided to watch something else. Again, already is in between had and watched. And in both cases, the second action, the public was worried, we decided. These are both in the past simple tense. Moving on, let's take a look at some of the notes for the past perfect continuous tense. Now, it's not often that we use the past perfect continuous tense. In writing and in speaking, users generally tend to use the past continuous tense. We use the past perfect continuous tense to emphasize the duration of one past event before another. For example, I had been living in Singapore for 5 years before I met my husband. Had been living is the first action, met is the second. And in this case, we want to emphasize that it's been 5 long years. So we use had been living. Next example. They had been trying to call their mother when she walked in. Had been trying is the first action. Walked is the second. Again, in this example, we want to stress that they had been carrying out this action for a long time, and therefore we use the past perfect continuous tense. Now, sometimes we will say or write the second action first. For example, she swam the channel in under an hour. She had been training for it for 3 years. They missed the movie, which they had been planning to watch. Now, swam and missed are both the second actions, had been training and had been planning are both the first actions. It doesn't make a difference. We still know which actions happened first and which ones second because of the tenses used. In this case, in these two sentences, we want to focus on the second action. Therefore, they come first in both examples. Now, the past perfect continuous tense is used somewhat like the past perfect simple, but we can also use it to describe an ongoing situation or a repeated action in the past. For example, the manager observed his employees. They had computer parts scattered all around them. They had been trying to solve the hardware problem. Now, in this example, we can see that the first action that had started and it had been going on, or it had been repeated over time, was the action they had been trying. And then the manager came in and he observed them, and they had the parts scattered everywhere. So observed and had are both in the past simple tense. Had been trying, because it refers to an ongoing situation, is written in the past perfect continuous tense. Let's take a look at another example. We could see that the house was finally ready. The workmen had been spending more than 8 weeks renovating it. Again, had been spending was a situation that went on for quite some time, followed by could see, written in the past simple tense. Well, now that we've had a look at both the past perfect simple and the past perfect continuous tenses, it's time for you to practice. Try these exercises now before you look at the answers. Goodbye.